Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Strife's Sanctum. Maybe wondering why I'm here yet another week after last week's Secret of Mana podcast. While I originally considered doing solely video games every 2 weeks to pass the time, there was something nagging at me. And what was nagging at me was that there was more I could do. And when I looked at what I could do versus what I should do, I realized that I am playing a lot of Japanese games. A lot of Japanese role-playing games, which, oddly enough, have a close relationship. Not quite the same, but close enough relationship. Say something like a Persona and whatnot. Persona is definitely influenced by Japanese anime. More so than, say, Final Fantasy, but even Final Fantasy to an extent is going to be influenced by, say, those cartoons or anime in that same culture. So when it came time to think of what else I could do, it didn't take me very long. I mean, this is only my third podcast, and I've already come up with this idea. Why not add to it? On my off weeks, add in anime watching. Because what I realized was, not only do I play a lot of Japanese games, I watch a lot of Japanese anime. I've watched it for about as long as I've played the game, so it would make sense. That being said, it also became a question of what do I start with? And I ended up finding something to talk about. A show that I recently rewatched a couple of weeks ago, and while I won't say was like all-time favorite, was still very good, and that being Psycho-Pass. It was a show from 2012 and 2013 by Production IG. That was the studio that created it. It ran for about 30 episodes and then a movie, and it also had a video game tie-in. I believe it's called Mandatory Happiness. And my interpretation of what Psycho-Pass is fairly similar to what other people have mentioned. It's got a great look, it's got great characters, and it uses its setting very well, and I will go over that. What it does also do is have an amazing first season, but when it came time to making a second dive into the background, into the world, it faltered a little bit. So it had an amazing first season, a longer first season, 20 episodes or so. Then I finally got around to watching the second season, and it's fine, I guess. That's not a good sign, is it? But I will go over that. Now, differently from a game, which is like 20 hours, 30 hours, sometimes 100 hours. An anime can only run for about 4 to 10 hours. If you've got these super long, like 100 to 500 to even 1,000 episode shows like a Naruto or a One Piece or whatever, sure, you have more than enough ground to cover. That is not what I'm looking at to do in these kinds of shows. I will preface this right off the bat. These are going to be like at most 12 to 20 episode things, maybe a 50 or 100 if it's important. They will be anime based. I'm not going to focus on a manga interpretation of it. Don't expect me to dive into that. I've read manga on occasion, but only in select series have I gone like so far into it and say, I want to see how this ends, or I want to see this version of it. And yes, there are some shows that finish their mangas before the anime does, and it does lend itself to, weaker endings or whatnot. Or go read the manga to see the conclusion. It happens. That's not what I'm here for. What I'm here for is to review what I'm seeing in the anime version. I do also want to stress that I am watching a dubbed version on Funimation or Crunchyroll or Netflix or some other service. I am a dub watcher. That is what I do. And I know that there's still some stigma on that which is unfortunate because everybody should be allowed to watch what they want to, how they want to. But I'm going to come from it from a dubbed perspective. So if I say a voice actor's name, it's probably going to be the dub actor's name. If it's what they've done in the past, it's what's going to be the dub actor's filmography. That's how I approach it. The way I approach it is because I can't really read subbed or subtitled material because, one, I don't know the Japanese language. I've tried reading it a couple of times to learn it, but no, it's very dense and very difficult. So imagine trying to watch or play a game or read a manga or whatever in a language like that. So English is my preferred language. It's easier for me to understand. If I rewatched a show, it's also easier for me to just kind of zone out and go through episodes again, like I do with some of my recent ones, my recent rewatches. But it's just easier for me to understand. But there's another more important reason, and this is something that actually comes up when I play games, because I've noticed that I've had trouble like reading subtitles in games, and it's because I am legally blind. I'm legally blind to an extent where I cannot drive, and I can still read and function without like canes, or I can still see what I'm doing, but I have to squint very closely to a screen. If anybody caught my recent Doki Doki Literature Club stream over on Twitch, or my recent Final Fantasy X-2 playthroughs where I had to, squint down towards the screen to see a thing, to see the numbers, or to see the moves. This happens in Persona 5 when I tried to record that, and anything that wasn't dubbed over, I kind of ignored. I let it play out on the screen, but didn't read it. That is why. So I have an accessibility reason to focus solely on dubs, and I also do think that I appreciate dubs more. And in some cases, I actually know the actors or have met them in conventions too. So that is where I'm coming from with these discussions. When talking about the anime in general, I'm going to keep following a template so that it's going to be slightly different, but I'm still going to try and keep the similar structure to what I had before. We're going to go over the plot and the characters. I'm not going to focus mostly on spoilers, but if it does happen, it does happen. I think in Psychopath's case, a lot of the spoilers are going to mean way more. It's going to be more of a mystery show or a crime drama, so that's going to be an impact, and it's probably going to hurt if I dig into spoilers too much. But instead of like music or battle system, like I would in a game, I'm going to talk about the show aesthetics and design after going into the characters. But the meat of it is going to be, what is the setting, what is the plot, and what are the characters doing. Those really drive it. Those three things. I'm still going to have the positives and negatives about the shows. Negatives first, and then the positives to end on a good note. And then we'll go from there. I don't know how long this is going to be. The first episode of Final Fantasy took about 30 minutes. The Secret of Mana episode took about 50 to 60. But we'll see how this goes. I love the idea of adding anime reviews to a channel that's already kind of in that sphere, but not quite. So, Psychopaths. Again, it was released in 2012, and it was a slow build and a slow building interest in Psychopaths, but by the time it got to America, it was already well known as a gritty show, a introspective show, and kind of a spiritual successor to Ghost in the Shell, which was at the time one of the most revered, and probably still is revered, sci-fi anime out there. So that's some hefty praise for a show from going on 10 years now, but it was last decade. It's not my favorite show of last decade, but it's certainly up there. And I gravitate towards the darker, more dystopic shows, but it has to have the right mix of things. What this show does well is it has a story and it has a setting, and it, at least in most cases, makes the characters fit into the world instead of making the world fit into the characters. And it does force you, at least on a surface level, in some indication, think about why the setting they're in is so broken or is the way it is, and how they interpret it. Because a character's developed by their setting. They're influenced by their parents, their school, their world. Not everybody's the same, of course, so you're going to have situations where everybody's going to be different. So it's how they intersperse and bounce off each other that makes a huge deal of it. But it's also a good use of the aesthetic because, as I stated before, this is very Ghost in the Shell-esque. It's that Blade Runner kind of like solid future cyberpunk kind of vibe that they're going for in a crime drama. And I think it comes across very well in almost all cases, at least at first. I said before that the second season is where things start to go awry, and there are a lot of reasons for that. I will still maintain that it is a good show into the second season, but it does start to lose its luster, and there's a lot of reasons as to why that would be the case. But I'll go over that when we get there. I said before that it is a futuristic society. I forget if the city itself has a name. I think it's just considered a part of Japan, pretty much, as most of this is. It's written in Japan. It's performed in Japan. They make these shows for Japanese audiences. It would make sense to have it set in Japan. But it's set in a future where a system called Sybil, otherwise known as the Sybil system. It's kind of, how would I explain it? It's like if supercomputers kind of ruled everything, but not in a Skynet blows everything up kind of way. It's what if a computerized system or an AI system, a system of control were added into our burgeoning social media world kind of thing. It's still like 15 or 20 years later, or even 30 years later, to combat some of the nuances of future tech. But the way the Sybil system works is that everybody lives the normal lives, but advances in medicine, advances in science, advances in technology have also brought about a new way of quantifying a person's stature in life. And there are two different ways they do that. One is by taking a test. Think of like those personality tests you take on the internet or in school and mixed it with the SATs or ACTs, and your score inexorably decides what path you should take in life. You have a certain affinity for tradesman's work. You have an affinity for nothing. You have an affinity for office work. You have an affinity for government work. You have athletics or artistic merit. You are shunted into those. You have choices, so to speak, but if you are limited to one thing, that's your lot. It mimics how Japan views testing in high school and college. There's a big emphasis on trying to get the highest score possible so that you and your family are held in high esteem because you're intelligent, you're charismatic, you're athletic, you're artistic, what have you. It's a play on that sort of system, but more in line with what is your lot in life. So one of those characters later on ends up having all of those talents. Not in a, oh my god, I'm perfect in every way sort of thing. More of the, what do I do about it? I have all these affinities, but I don't know what to do. And it does drive people up the wall because she has all the opportunities that other people really don't. But again, that's something that the show delves into. The darker element of this Sybil system, as if basically being geared toward one thing in your life wasn't dark enough, is what's known as a crime coefficient. They've been able to quantify a person's a person's number and to like how they are like their emotional state. Their emotional state at any given time is monitored through street scans or doctor's appointments or even at work. And if you go over a certain number, which I believe is 100, you are branded a latent criminal. Your number can go down, but that is considered rare. So they've developed a way to tell people, if you're over 100, you are shunted from society because you are no longer able to function as a normal person. I don't know the exact ways somebody gets to 100. It's either like severe emotional stress, or it's like a major accident. So a lot of people who suffer through getting to 100 or even over 300, which is the mark of death, you have somebody gets kidnapped, somebody witnesses a murder, somebody does a hit and run accidents. That sort of crazy sort of scenario presents itself, and the major flaw in that system, and what the show exploits, is even bystanders to an accident suffer emotional trauma. You don't have to be directly involved. You don't have to be the one who was kidnapped. And even if you are affected by that. It isn't just the person committing the act, it is the issues surrounding said problem. So if you're the one who is kidnapped, the show also says, well, what is your emotional state? Are you going to turn into a latent criminal because you are part of this? Through no fault of your own. And that's something that the main characters have to struggle with. And I do appreciate that being explored to an amazing extent. Let me get some more. So, who are the people that do all the work? There are two classes of people who work for I believe it's the Ministry of Welfare's Police Bureau, or MWPSV. MWPSV. It's a Public Safety Bureau. Public Safety Bureau. So, Ministry of Welfare's Public Safety Bureau. That's what it was. So in that, they have certain divisions. It's like a crime division. It's like a police force kind of thing, undercover cops kind of thing. And inspectors are your leads. Their whole job is to check a crime scene and investigate it and send people known as enforcers. Enforcers are latent criminals, so people whose psychopaths are told, you're too far gone, we're going to send you to a mental facility, or we're going to execute you, but we give you the chance to work. You're basically indentured servitude, but you still get to live provided you work for the MWPSV as an enforcer. So they are the groundwork. They are the watchdogs. They are the ones sniffing out all the suspects. And they both work together, but the inspectors are above, but also aside from what the enforcers do. But they all kind of work together to solve cases. So it's not like, I can't do anything just because you didn't tell me to. No, they're smart enough to do things for themselves. And that's where some of the issues lie with some of the characters, as we'll see later when I talk about the characters in general. You can be an inspector and fall to enforcer status. That is something you don't want to have happen, but does. Now, an enforcer and an inspector get to use what is known as a dominator. Think of like a gun that can turn into a Swiss Army knife kind of thing. It's a gun that reads the crime coefficient of anybody, even themselves. You can point it at your coworkers to see their coefficients, or you could point it at yourself to see your own. The Sybil system has the number, and it will lock the weapon not only to your person, but it will say, you have no right to use this weapon. You can paralyze a person if they're over 100. You can kill a person and blow them up if they're over 300. Or if they are like a drone or a metallic being or something, like a robot, you could just decompose them, get rid of them outright. So those are the settings that they use, and that thing is a potent weapon. That being said, a couple of them still use martial arts because they would rather protect themselves, and have said as much that a dominator can only do so much. So they don't trust the dominator with every single facet of their lives. The show structure is any crime drama you've ever seen. So think of kidnapping, rape, forging documents, forging information, all that sort of stuff, serial murder cases, that sort of thing. It's also done in the way that the setting would be. So they have, holographic projections. They have, you can change your clothes to be holographic. The street scanners are made of computers, so you can hack computers and stuff, or you can hack a drone and make it fight you, or stuff like that. So anything that's a futuristic mindset or something that's been explored in a sci-fi, like a hard sci-fi setting, is rife for this sort of setting. But now we get to the meat of this, not just what the Sibyl system is, but how it affects the characters. Because Psycho-Pass would not be as good as it is without characters to back it up. And the main character of the entire franchise is Akane Sunomori. In the dub version, she was voiced by Kate Oxley. And this was kind of like Kate's major role. She'd been in some other shows before, but this was kind of the one where she got to be the main character. And she's played very subdued. Akane is the character where everything tends to revolve around, because she has this innate ability to where no matter what she does not heighten her crime coefficient. It never gets clouded, which is the sign that she's going to go over 100. She always seems to manage, whether it's a bad situation or a good situation, to just kind of be level-headed to an almost insane extent. It doesn't mean she's not emotional. That's what I want to get across, is she is emotional, but for some odd reason, it doesn't seem to affect her more than it would somebody else. So she joins the MWPSV's crime division as an inspector because she has that innate ability, and because when she took the test, she basically scored A's in everything. So she had an aptitude for everything. And it drives her coworkers nuts because she has all these aptitudes that nobody sees. And her story arc is, how do you maintain your sanity in this kind of environment full of these criminals, basically, in a dystopic society where not everything is as happy as it should be, because it can't be, because people are abusing their emotional state. And the show tends to be kind of a satire. Well, I don't know, satire is the right word, but it functions as, just because you've made a society based on a certain program, that doesn't mean that you can't be abused. It doesn't mean it can't have blind spots. So Akane as a character has to deal with that. In the first season, that's her entire arc. And through all of the cases and all of the issues that she suffers dealing with the main characters and the main villains, her growth is what really sets the show apart. And it even does in season 2, because they focus on the aftermath of season 1 right into season 2, when a lot of the, I'd say, big storyline ideas of like, what is this Sibyl system, they tell you what that is near the end of season 1. So she knows everything. She knows how to handle everything, but it is starting to weigh on her in season 2, and she'd been through so much stuff. Again, I don't want to spoil it in case anybody wants to, but suffice it to say, a lot of graphic stuff gets involved, and Akane in general is a very good viewpoint character for this sort of thing, because you're somebody who you have no knowledge of this. This is kind of similar to Tidus in Final Fantasy X. I know he gets a lot of bad rap because of his attitude, but How would you approach being thrust into this crazy world that you don't know anything about? How do you process all of the information overload that is being given to you on a daily basis? So I think she succeeds very well. It also helps that the other character, usually considered the main character of season one, I think Akane honestly is the main character of season one still, but Shinya Kogami. Think Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop. That's all you need to know. You think Spike Spiegel. That's where his inspiration lies. You see his hair. You see his martial arts prowess. You see he's a big fucking chain smoker. He is Spike Spiegel in this Psycho-Pass universe. He was voiced by Robert McCollum, who, again, this was kind of what he was known for. The nice thing is a lot of the actors in Psycho-Pass were people I knew, but this was kind of like their big dubbed show, I think. And he really sets himself apart because, again, he is into this world more than Akane is, but he is also trying to keep her distant from, don't let yourself get too clouded. Don't let anything happen. I can take it because I'm already fucked, right? I'm already a latent criminal because I tried to find somebody who murdered my friend. So his motivation is revenge. And he is after the main villain. So he was a former inspector turned enforcer, and he is downtrodden, and he knows that this society's fucked, so he doesn't want Akane to suffer the same problem. So he is able to innately see what's going on more so than any other people who try to go by the book. And that's the issue with Akane sometimes, is she goes by the book, and Shinya Kogami is just like, you're not seeing it. You're not seeing what a criminal would see. You're not seeing these blind spots that somebody would see. So he's innately able to like take some information from a case and be like, what about this? What about this as an answer? And then all of a sudden, I mean, more times than not, it ends up being the right answer. So that ends up getting the attention of the main villain, which we'll talk about in a minute. And his prowess as a character counteracts Akane, who is the audience foil, and those two really sell this for me, and it's really nice. The third main character is Nabucha Ginoza. He's voiced by Josh Grell, who was more so a main character in a lot of other shows. A lot of like smaller shows, like comedies and stuff. He was also in Ruby as one of the side characters of the more recent seasons. So that Rooster Teeth independent anime-esque show. He's in that one. So Josh Grell's been around quite a bit longer and done a lot more like notable stuff, but in this show he's like the third main character. He's more like Akane would be. He's the inspector, but he's pissed off. So he's been around for maybe 5 or 10 years. He's got like daddy issues, that sort of like issues with authority, because he's the direct commander of the division. So he has to like keep this facade of emotional stability while he's just like cracking on the inside, because it, like, everything that Kogami does, which honestly comes to pass, is against what he's been taught, because he's been taught, Ginoza has been taught, we have to follow protocol, we have to, not in the sort of an antagonistic way, but you can understand why it's like, well, this is not normal, why are you doing this? The issue is that he respects him, because he knows how good Kogami is, but he also knows that if he lets him run roughshod, then his authority gets undermined, and then the people that are above Ginoza, who run the organization, are like, you're doing it wrong. And then that reflects badly on Ginoza, because he has to have this balancing act of inspector enforcer kind of thing, but he's also trying to train Akane to do her job, because she doesn't know it, because he's been at it for 3 years, she's been at it for a week, that sort of thing. So he's an interesting case study in what the emotional instability of the Sybil system does, because unlike Akane and Kogami, who don't really have much to go on, they're on opposite sides of the coin. He's the one in the middle juggling what is right versus what is going to work for the society at large. And I appreciate that side of it because they don't overdo it. They don't overstep how important he is, but they also give him a lot of chance to breathe. But they still make it clear that Akane and Kogami are the important ones. And speaking of important, is the main villain of the first season. Note I haven't gotten into the second season yet, but the first season is Shogo Makishima. You're going to hear that name a lot because the psychopaths love. Maybe this is just an anime trope. They love to like name characters outright. They go Shogo Makishima, like they just talk all the time. Maybe that's just like a default thing. It's like the Solid Snake Metal Gear. Like he always says Metal Gear, or he always says stuff. Like you tell Solid Snake a question and he repeats the question. It's kind of like a Japanese trope. It's like in this show, like they will say his name over and over and over, and it's kind of funny. His whole idea is his crime coefficient is different from everybody else's. He has found an emotional way, despite being an absolute piece of shit criminal mastermind, that according to the Sybil system, he is not a latent criminal. So he abuses that to his advantage, and he finds other like-minded individuals to carry out lots and lots and lots of gruesome shit. So he's the one that forced Kogami to go rogue and go and enforcer. And for better or for worse, he is the main foil for the entire first season. And I like him. I'm not a huge fan of mastermind characters, but I'm okay with them in an extent. And I think Psycho-Pass does a decent job. It's not perfect, but they do a decent job, I think, with the whole mastermind concept. And those are kind of your main four characters. Everybody else in the show is not what I would call a main character, because you have your like 5 or 6 other people of the crime division, and then you have the other ancillary characters, but they don't impact the plot as much. So they really focus in on these 4 characters in the show, give a little weight to the others in maybe an episode or 2, but then don't force the issue. They do the smart thing and they say, you get an episode or 2 to yourself, but we're not going to give you all the focus, because then that would take away from the story we're trying to present elsewhere. So the B+ players or the B players are adequately given their own time to give their character moments, but they don't interrupt the flow of the show. And the show, as stated before, is a reference to Ghost in the Shell. This is, 2012 would have been 15, 16 years after the movie came out. So Ghost in the Shell was a landmark back in the 90s. I happen to think the anime series in early 2000s, Standalone Complex, is better, but you wouldn't have had that without the movie being as big a hit as it was. So if you've ever seen Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex from the early 2000s, you kind of know what you're in for with Psycho-Pass in a similar but different way. So you don't have to really think too hard about what is all this technology saying? What is all this work saying? And the uses of this technology. You can change your clothes. You can change the look of your apartment. So you have an apartment that looks like a barren apartment, but you put a setting in your computer and the computer just automatically says, it looks like a Victorian setting. It looks like a Japanese shrine. It looks like a jail cell. It's a holographic projection. You can make it look like the Starship Enterprise if you wanted, if it was a setting in that computer. The computer just tells you everything, and people are tied to their technology. So it's also social commentary. That was when I said satire, social commentary. It's a social commentary on the use of technology and what that does to people. because I, as a person, even in the social media age, not so much the social media itself, but the internet in general, if the internet breaks at all, if YouTube breaks at all, or Twitch breaks at all, or if I'm even gone from my internet for half a minute, I go stir crazy, because everything I do is tied to the internet. Unless I'm working out or going out to go shopping or go to work, like, I'm tied to the internet. I'm talking to you through a system that is tied to the internet because I'm uploading this stuff to the internet. I'm watching other people do stuff on Twitch or YouTube or whatever from the internet. Imagine even more of that. Like, everything is tied to your phone, or everything is tied to what your home. It's a smart home. It's a smart outfit. It's a smart phone. It's a smart society. It's basically, technology is even more everything. It's almost the Matrix. It's not the Matrix because it's still real, but what if the Matrix was real? That's how much of this is a thing. And it's crazy to think that they were able to take what they had as inspiration from Blade Runner, from Ghost in the Shell, from the Matrix, or whatever they did, and turn it into this. And again, they use all of that to good advantage. And they don't overuse the criminality as a crutch, at least in most cases. Like, it's a dark show, don't get me wrong, but they show and tell. But the first season, in most cases, tells but doesn't show, and only shows when it has to. Like when the Dominators are turned up to 300 and they say, I'm going to blow you up now. So they show you blowing up, or they show you having, bled out on the floor, that sort of thing. It's not overdone. So the focus is still on the characters. The focus is still on all of that. So let's see. That being said, when we get to the negatives of the show, and I had to think about this a little bit, I'll go into season 1 first, but I'll save a lot of my issues for season 2. As far as season 1 goes, there's not a lot to dismiss. The only thing I will say is that Shogo Makishima is a better interpretation of a mastermind, but I still don't really like mastermind characters in general, because mastermind character, the Dr. Claus, that sort of, like, they sit in a chair, Blofeld, that sort of thing. They sit in a chair and they send their goon squad, or they send their crime of the day guys to get rid of the I'll get you next time gadget kind of thing. And and I've seen that in a lot of shows, and I don't really like it because the characters don't show enough to me that they themselves can win a fight, that they themselves can do a thing that another person is doing for them. On occasion, Makishima has proven to be a martial artist and can, use weaponry, but I do think they don't do enough of it. They let his, like, philosophical superiority, which is fine because Alex Organ plays him so well. But if you're not into mastermind characters, then Shogo may not be somebody that really speaks to you at all, but he's still an important piece of season 1. That would be my one criticism of season 1. Which is when we get to season 2, which sucks. And it was so good. It had so much potential coming off of season 1. But when I said show don't tell, tell don't show, they turned it the absolute opposite. When they did season 2, not only did they have a different character, Kirito Kamui, who does a different way. He has a different way of going about getting rid of the system. He abuses psychopaths in a different way by using the Dominators, for instance, but I won't say how or why he gets around it, but that's the mystery of season 2. But when they get around to changing how to show conflict, The show is way darker in the sense that they're crude. They try to show a lot more like people blowing up, people dying, people getting killed, especially in like these mob or mall accidents where everybody gets shot, everybody blows up, and it's just too much. And even like some of the main characters is just like, well, I thought you were building this character. Oh, and it's just like it's like a fart balloon. It's just, and it's just like, well, so much for that. I think the issue with gore, and this is something that I deal with in like I like gore and I like blood and things like that, but in my 30s now, I understand that that's, just gore for gore's sake doesn't work. Why it works in season 1 is because you build up to the moments where it matters. You don't just here's that Call of Duty thing where you're shooting up all those dudes in that airport, this is so shocking, they force it. It feels like in season 2 they were forcing it a bit too much, while also ignoring what made season 1 so good, is because Akane's still the main character, but it's like they skip a step. They skip a step in, well, who are the new characters? Why are they important? And then by the time the end of the season runs around, they lose a lot of steam. No more so than, I believe her name is Mika Shimotsky, who's voiced by Shirami Lee, who did Makoto in Persona 5. And so Mika, I had to go back and watch an episode before I recorded this to prove something that was nagging me. In season 1, in one of the earlier missions, Mika actually shows up as a character. Kind of a side character, but still, she gets affected. Let's just come right out and say it. She's a victim in one way or another. I won't spoil what happens, because I'd say that 2 or 3 episode stretch is actually some of the best of the entire show. But it's early on. It's like episode 6 or 7 kind of thing. And she shows up. And you don't think about it. And I don't know if the show itself wants you to think about it either, because when season 2 hits, there's a time jump to, justify season 1 to season 2. The same character actually shows up again. Same voice actress and everything. She's a bit older now. She's out of school. And she gets a higher profile, of course, because she's one of the main characters of season 2. But I'm also like, when I was watching season 2, none of what happened to her in those 2 or 3 episodes, like, was she Shogo Makishima important? No. But still, it would have fed into her own backstory, which would have included her front story, if you would have added that little step in there. So the fact that I had to go back because I was like, I had heard this character before. Is it the same person? It was. Maybe it was just supposed to be an Easter egg and they didn't think about it and they put her in season 2 and it's like, aha, it's fine. But the fact that you're building an old character into a new character that's involving themselves in the main plot is kind of like, well, why aren't you talking about being a victim, or why aren't you talking about... They don't go into it at all. And I'm just like, well, that seems like a wasted opportunity, you would think. And speaking of a wasted opportunity is her interaction with Akane, because Akane by this point has grown into a more full-fledged detective and kind of leader of the Public Safety Bureau over even Ginoza at this point. Again, reasons. But Mika's whole thing is much like Ginoza, where you gotta be by the book and you gotta do things this way, and why aren't you doing it? It's just like this like 4 or 5 episode stretch where everything Akane does, we understand because we've been around her and been through her situation. Mika just sits there and is like passive aggressively bitchy, which is fine because I thought she'd be like a side villain, or, you got to have some of that antagonistic banter, because like, how do you build that when you're trying to build a new season with newer characters and everything? It seems like they're trying to build this rivalry may not be the best term, but like Akane is on one side as the character viewpoint, but Mika is this by the book. Like, why is this lady doing this stuff? And you get this back and forth, and you think that maybe episode 6, episode 7, it's going to blow up, and they're going to do the thing where either I'm going to turn evil because you're not paying attention to me because you're doing things this way and it's going wrong. And it's like, well, no, but you're not paying attention. No, I don't care. You know, that sort of like antagonistic banter. You feel that they're going to build up to it. But by the time they've done that, they've introduced the actual villains, and it feels like Mika's storyline gets dropped, almost like a wrestling thing. And it reminded me of a saying a few times, because I do watch wrestling, and it especially now, because I'd say in WWE, but even in AEW, this happens where you have a storyline and you give it a little bit of time to breathe. But you do something else, and it's called a 3-month rule. By 3 months, everything you thought you knew 3 months ago, we dropped it. We didn't explain it. We moved on to something else. It's like the goldfish. It's like, what now? It's like, whatever. So this thought that Akane and Mika would come to blows or come to this like mutual understanding or something, that doesn't happen. They focus on a totally different storyline, and Mika's honestly just kind of left to just rot, I guess, literally in a way. Spoiler, she doesn't rot. That was figuratively, duh. Anyway. But mentally, like, you'd think, why did you spend all this time making her out to be a bit of a bitch if you didn't have her, like, butt heads with Akane more and come to that, like, it's cliche and tropey, yes, but you're actually focused on spending time building it up for no payoff. So it really annoyed me that not only that, but you have the issues of the gore fest happening. You have the character failing on a build-up level because you just let it, and then, as if that weren't bad enough, the actual villains, you spend like the last 2 or 3 episodes giving them the motivation, and in one instance it works, and then the other 2 instances the other villains are just, really? I was staring at the screen, hoping it would end, or actively just angry that this was their answer. And then they do some other stuff to justify it, and it's like, no, it doesn't work. So I would say for anyone watching Psycho-Pass to watch season 1, and that's how I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to wrap it up by saying Psycho-Pass is season 1. It's a 20 to 24 episode season, I guess. Watch season 2 at your own risk, because while you get more of the thing you enjoy, you also get more of the things that you don't. And I was warned for a couple of years not to watch it. By the time I get done with the amazing season 1, I was told, nah, don't. So that'll learn me. So if I can pass along that information as yet another drop in the bucket, Psycho-Pass is a great story. Psycho-Pass is a great setting and great characters and a great crime drama. And it utilizes a hard sci-fi approach, but also does it dark enough, but it does it sophisticated enough that you get this Ghost in the Shell vibe. You get this The Matrix vibe. You get all of this stuff that feels like it makes sense. But then it goes too far in a different direction by season 2, and then you can't even... You still compartmentalize that season 1 was great. So that would be my overall recommendation if you've never watched this show or never watched anime in general. Do I think somebody who's never watched an anime before would get something out of it? I do. I would definitely call this a gateway anime in general, because it doesn't focus on comedy. It's very serious. It's very emotional. But it also does the society is wrong, like sci-fi dystopic thing that, say, a Blade Runner. If somebody had watched a Blade Runner, or is, you know, into Blade Runner, or saw Blade Runner 2049, you know, or saw The Matrix, they would get it. Just because it was from a different country, they would get this understanding. They would get this show, I think. And anime fans in general would find a lot to enjoy, provided you do what I should have done, and that's avoid season 2. Season 1, with its 4 main characters and everybody ancillary involved, build this amazing show that I don't regret watching over again. I knew from my first go around a few years ago, watching it again really inspired me, and that's why this is my first episode in this series of anime reviews, because it still spoke to me, provided I understand why it did, why this world is messed up and how they go around it, why crime makes sense, even in a world where crime shouldn't exist anymore. You know, so you have so much to go by and so much to work with that it's still very special to me. Is it my favorite anime? No. We'll get to those eventually. But I did want to start off these anime reviews. And again, I wanted to start them off with something that I respected and enjoyed, but knew that there was still room for growth and room for improvement. Save some of the heavier, like more well-known material for later to see if anybody was interested in this. So the video game reviews will still happen. Those will be the majority. Tales of Berseria is next week. I'm still hoping to get that next week. The week after will be another anime review. So I'm going to cycle through anime review, video game review, anime review, video game review. It turns out that I had the same amount of anime I was interested in talking about as I did video games. And the cool thing is that I can build from there. So next week will be Tales of Berseria. The week after, we'll go into another show I just rewatched, The Rising of Shield Hero. After that, I'll see what show speaks to me, whether it's something I watch next, like watch today on my day off, or it could be a show that I have in my list. But all I know is that I think that this is going to be a good way for me to keep the content going and keep the content flowing, but also introduce people who are into the video games, maybe into the anime sphere a little bit, or the anime sphere into the video game sphere, because everything kind of flows together. It's from the same culture, it's from the same vibe, just presented in a different way, whether it's a video game or an anime. I think there's something for everyone to enjoy, and I hope that comes across. And I think anybody who watched for even a second, but if it does speak to you and does interest you, please like, share, or subscribe, or let other people know that this might be something that they enjoy. If you do have comments or like concerns about some of the ways I was approaching it, sure, let me know. I'm still new to this. This is only the third time I've done this, so I'm rough around the edges. But I really appreciate any advice or just any comments or support anybody would be willing to give me, because this is something I'm very excited about, and I want to make it succeed, and I want to make it a good experience for everyone involved. But that's it for me for another week. So this is Citizen Strife signing off.